Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our final talk in our series of Fruit of the Holy Spirit from Galatians 5. I'm picking up the very last topic of self-control or temperance, as it says in the King James Bible. Just want to start by saying that the biggest leadership responsibility or challenge that anybody could ever face, in my opinion, would be the leading of yourself, the self-leadership. Everyone is a leader. Lots of people say, well, I'm not a leader, I'm not in leadership. We are all in leadership. Leading ourselves is the biggest responsibility, I think, that we could ever face. Everything flows out of leading ourselves really well. So we're going to look at this topic very quickly of self-control or temperance, as it says in the King James Version. Just as a very brief recap, Galatians 5, this letter, is addressing the people on their lifestyle, if you like, the way they're living their lives, encouraging them to live by the Holy Spirit, to walk by the Holy Spirit, be guided by the Holy Spirit, not by their old ways or the natural instincts or the selfish instincts or the flesh, as it says in Galatians, but to live a life that's directed and controlled and led by the Holy Spirit. So that's our umbrella, if you like. That's our context to this particular aspect of self-control. The word used for self-control is a Greek word, and you know that I like my Greek words. Enkrateia is how you might pronounce it, I think, which means power over oneself, an inner government. There's a lot of talk at the moment about government. Self-control is the inner governance or the self-governance that we have. The Bible is pretty clear that a lack of self-control is not good. I'm just going to read from Proverbs 25 to 28. It says this: whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. So a lack of self-governance and self-control is like a devastated city, if you can picture that. It goes on earlier on in Proverbs, it says this in Proverbs 16, verse 32. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes his city. There is an implication there to say that it's harder to control your own spirit than it is to take a city, or it's better, you might say. So where does this help come from in terms of self-control? Where do we actually get help to do this? Well, I think the word self in self-control is slightly misleading, in my opinion, because actually the control that we ultimately get comes from the Holy Spirit. In the same way that I can't save my own soul, I can't forgive my own sins, I can't deal with that. That comes from outside of me through Jesus, through what God has done through his son, Jesus. And it's the same with self-control. The help, the assistance, if you like, you might say the drive, the ability to do this comes actually from outside ourselves. It comes from the Holy Spirit, living a life in parallel, in conjunction, in harmony with the Holy Spirit. So it's the Holy Spirit that helps us. So let's quickly look at what we might have self-control over. What are some of the things that we have, or we could have self-control over? I think it's the restraint of our emotions, the restraint of our thoughts, the restraint of our desires, our speech, and ultimately our actions. I was trying to think in preparation of some examples of either good or bad self-control in my own life. I remember being on a car journey with a colleague many years ago. I think we were coming back from Bristol. It was late in the day. Well, we'd had something to eat, and we knew we were going to be home at 9 or 10 o'clock. And Steve, the guy I was working with, decided we should get some pick and mix sweets to ease the journey. I think he was fed up with my company, to be honest. So we got these pick and mix sweets, and I realised we have a completely different value system, because Steve would seemingly just have one of these sweets every 30 minutes. So he lived up on the Wirral, still does, and I was going to drop him off. And I'm thinking, this is going to last him a week. My self-control meant within 15 miles of where we've been, my sweets were all gone. We were just not quite one after another. So my self-control in that aspect was a lot worse than Steve, who I work with. We've all got different aspects of self-control. Self-control is the ability to say no when it's right to say no, to walk away, to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to think of that. I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to go looking for that. I'm not going to take my mind over there, and I'm not going to take this action. It might be that I'm not going to eat this thing. I'm not going to drink this thing. I'm not going to go to this place. That's the outworking of self-control. The good news for you, the good news for me, is the Holy Spirit is here to help. So if you're struggling in the area of self-control, turn to the Holy Spirit. Why don't you pray straight after this is finished? Why don't you just acknowledge where your areas of self-control are weak, where you need some help? The other thing I would say is, as well as turning in prayer to the Holy Spirit, turning to one another can be quite a good thing. Actually, working out self-control in community a lot of the times can be a good thing. You think of some of the, if you like, the diet clubs, the diet programs, the food eating programs you can join, things like Slimming World, Weight Watchers. They are always done in community because there's an accountability there, there's an openness, there's a sharing. And where it's right, sometimes just to share with somebody, I'm weak in this area of self-control. This is a particular aspect where I'm just struggling. I think just really helps. You need to be sensible, you need to be wise, and you need to be careful about that. But sometimes just keeping these things with ourselves can lead to a whole secondary lot of problems I found sometimes, and it just burns up on the inside of you. But let me be clear, our priority, first of all, is a vertical one. It's to turn to heaven for help. And secondly, it's a horizontal one. It's to turn to community, those within the church. So if you know people you can love and trust to turn to, I'd advise you to doing that. Hope you've enjoyed this series, and I hope I've not gone on for too long. Thank you.